Schoology, or excuse me, let's go to Quizlet.live right now. Quizlet.live. Ooh, and I also believe that there is an upfront article in there that we will be working on. So somewhere in here, I believe. So after the Brain Pop video, as we're working on the Unit 8 stuff, probably in there, we will be addressing that upfront article that we'll read together. So here we go. Whoops. So there we go. Let's get logged in. First things first. St. Douglas. Strutman. Johnson. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 6. We're pretty close. Give you about 30 seconds to get in if you haven't done so already. All right, we got everybody in. Here we go. Round one. And they're racing. Very nice. Here we go. Round two. All right, here we go, folks. A quick brain pop video on political party beliefs. Has a whole lot to do with what we are studying this unit. So here we go.
Hey, since when are you a hippie? Dear Tim and Moby, what makes you a Democrat or a Republican? From Davis. Well, there's no one thing that automatically makes you a Democrat or a Republican. Those are the two major political parties in the United States. Identifying yourself with a political party usually means that you share its beliefs, or at least a good chunk of them. You can register with a political party if you want when you turn 18. That's actually the technical way to become a party member. But you don't have to. Many people are registered as independent, or simply not affiliated with any major party. That's true. Democrats don't always vote for Democrats, and Republicans don't always vote for Republicans. Casting a vote has a lot to do with what's going on in the world at the time, and your opinion of the individual candidate. Let's back up for a second and talk about political beliefs. What exactly are they, and where do they come from? There are basic core beliefs that pretty much all Americans can agree on. Freedom, equality, democracy. Right. You've heard those laid out in our Constitution, in its Bill of Rights, and in our Declaration of Independence. But when you get beyond these abstract beliefs that we all rally around, people start to get divided. I mean, no one's going to argue that freedom isn't a good thing, but what does freedom really mean? What kind of freedom are we talking about, and how far should it go? When it comes to real-life issues like education, the environment, healthcare, foreign policy, jobs and the economy, race and gender relations,
I think that you could make an argument that the true difference between conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican is their definition of freedom. Does that make any sense? If you're on one side of the political spectrum and you firmly believe that freedom means being able to do what you want with your business, do what you want with armaments, do what you want in terms of being free from taxes, that's your definition of freedom. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're on the other side of the political spectrum, you could make the argument that your definition of freedom includes freedom for all those people involved. And that freedom kind of doesn't necessarily mean freedom in the other sense. It means like safety. You guys get me? Freedom from oppression, freedom from somebody who's going to abuse others. How about freedom to be safe? Does that make sense, guys? So that definition of freedom, people use that word liberty, freedom, kind of in this all-encompassing window, like saying that I'm a part of the party that believes in freedom. Well, in a sense, they both believe in freedom, don't they? It's just a different type, which I think is a like observation by this video. So
and national security, political opinions are as widely varied as you can possibly imagine. How do we form these opinions? Well, our political ideologies or beliefs are shaped by where we come from, our culture, ethnicity, religion, where we grew up, what we learn from our families. And then we're influenced by what we hear from people at school and at work, from politicians, and of course the media. A person's political beliefs often shift and change as they grow older and hear more about the issues and have more personal experiences. Yeah, whoa. People can get pretty passionate about their beliefs. That's a good thing. Real debate is a healthy environment for ideas. But respecting others' beliefs is important too. You can be friends with people who don't share all your political beliefs. Political beliefs even vary within families. Political parties, like the Democratic Party, Republican Party, and the Green Party, are defined by their political platforms. A platform is a set of issues and principles that a political party supports. So, when people vote, they're likely to vote for the candidate from the party whose platform is closest to their own political ideology and whose actions in office will best represent their beliefs. No, you can't vote for more than one party's candidate. Well, because you just can't. Why do you keep changing clothes?
open up that Unit 8 document. Open up that Unit 8 document. And what's going to happen in just a moment, but not yet, is I'm going to kind of roam around here, and I want to see how you're doing on this. I want to see where it is that you are on that Unit 8 document, okay? I want you to scroll to the part of the document that's under week 2, okay? And when you get there, like I said, I will be around in just a second here. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm assuming that by now you will have answered, all of these portions. This stuff is mostly out of the book. Let me make sure I'm sharing with the group that's online. Always forget about sharing my screen. Okay, so we already did that part. Okay, we listened to Civics 101 last week. We talked about the super PAC. We read this. Should voter registration be automatic? We did this other part earlier in the week. Okay, I'm assuming that you played the Cast Your Vote video by now. Okay. Is it too hard to vote in the U.S.? Here we go. So these questions are what I want you to, well, actually, here we go, right here, where it says, do you think voting is a right or a privilege? If you haven't answered this question already, I want you to answer it right now. This is an opinion piece. This is a subjective. This is not like something that's objective, okay? If you think it's a right, then you think that everybody should be able to vote, even if you don't agree with them, even if you don't think that they have the capacity or the brain power to do it. You think it's their right. People have died for it. Not up to me. It's up to us. It's a right. Or you think it's a privilege. You can't go out and commit felonies and go in and vote. And we don't want to let some of these people vote. Have you seen some of these people? They can't spell their name. We're going to let them vote. I'm just kind of giving you the perspective. You guys get me? Okay. So where do you think you lie on the spectrum? Is it a right or is it a privilege? Is it a right or is it a privilege? Because I would argue there's a distinct difference there, yes? I mean, my own personal take is that you got to have a college degree. I'm self-serving because I have a college degree, but whatever, whatever. Okay. I'm assuming that everybody has answered that. Here's what I want you to do now. Skim these questions, because you're going to need to answer them. And I'm not going to stop the video as this goes on. So take a look at these. Okay. In 2016, what percent of Americans who were eligible to vote actually went out and voted? We've already talked about some of these percentages already, right? We've kind of said that, like in the United States, over 50% is pretty good for an election. Okay. Over 50%, that's pretty good. But in other countries, some of them are getting up to like 80. In 2014, the Presidential Election Commission released a report that said no American should have to wait longer than blank minutes to vote. One reason for policies like voter ID laws for voting is to prevent voter fraud. How many documented cases of voter fraud? What are the 2 ways the host describes that we could make voting easier in the U.S.? Okay, so those are the questions that we're looking for. Keep those in the back of your mind, because I'm going to play that video for you right now for the group.
What's up? I'm Miles Best, journalist, t-shirt enthusiast, and host of Above the Noise. Now, I voted in pretty much every election since I turned 18. I remember my great-grandparents' house being a polling place, and I used to love to be the one to pass out the little I voted stickers to folks when I was a kid. But now that I'm grown, I know the process can sometimes be way too complicated, which could discourage people from voting in the first place. In 2016, my polling place changed and I ended up having to drive to 3 different locations before I could even get into the voting booth. It was a pain in the butt. And voting is supposed to be the cornerstone of a healthy democracy. But why does the US fall so far behind other developed nations when it comes to voter turnout? In 2016, only about 61% of people who could vote actually voted, compared to Belgium, which had an 87.2% turnout rate in 2014, Turkey had 84.3% in 2015, and Sweden's was 82.5% in 2014. Now, when folks talk to young people and other underrepresented groups, it's always, go out and vote if you want your voices heard, which is true. But a tedious registration process and a wide range of laws that vary across the country aimed at suppressing turnout that target low-income folks, students, disabled folks, seniors, and communities of color with laws that include strict voter ID, voter purges, and poll closures, it can greatly impact turnout. So it has me wondering, is voting too hard in the US? There's been tactics that have been used to get in the way of people voting since America's birth. When we first started voting as a nation, only land-owning white men could vote. And the fight to get as many people the right to vote was a hard-fought battle that culminated in the passing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But that was a long time ago, right? Nearly everyone can vote now, so what's going on? I've heard a lot of criticisms aimed at young people that Americans are too lazy or too apathetic to vote. But is that true? There's lots of examples of how voting just isn't that easy for certain communities, especially young voters, people of color, people in rural communities, or people with disabilities. So there was this 2014 report that was basically like, this is how elections should go. And in the report, they were saying that no citizen should wait more than 30 minutes to vote. But when you look at the 2018 primaries, Black and Latino voters ended up having to wait like 45 minutes longer than white voters. Some of that is because people of color may live in areas where there are fewer resources and limited polling sites. Now, when the Voters' Rights Act passed in 1965, there was provisions in the law that basically said if you are a state that has a history of discrimination, you got to get federal approval and get it sealed off before you make a law. That was because some states just needed a little push, a little more oomph to make sure that they protected the rights of Black and brown voters. But in 2013, the Supreme Court rolled back that provision, saying there was rising voter turnout rates in minority neighborhoods. Basically, they said we didn't need it anymore. Almost immediately after that decision was made, states with a history of discriminatory practices, including Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama, all enforced photo ID laws that were previously not allowed under the provision. Now, there are folks in favor of the law that are constantly talking about, these policies help us fight against voter fraud. They protect us and, make elections safer. But then, if you look at this report from the Brennan Center, they listed only like 4 documented cases of voter fraud in the 2016 election. There's even the Heritage Foundation, which is, a conservative organization, and they found just under 1,300 documented cases of voter fraud in the last 40 years. 40 years. Now, that might sound like a lot, but that's billions of votes. 1,300 cases, billions of votes. And most of them were charges of registration fraud or buying votes, not even like direct fraud like in the polls on election day. And this is particularly alarming when you think about 11% of eligible voters, and this is mainly a lot of young people and folks in these poor rural neighborhoods, they don't have government issued photo IDs. That's almost 21 million people who likely can't vote. Like I said before, voting is supposed to be a pillar of a healthy democracy. But we're here in the US where we claim to be this democracy powerhouse, but we're 26th out of 32 developed democracies when it comes to the percentage of voting age people who actually participate in their civic duty and go to the polls. But the countries ahead of America make voting a lot easier for their citizens. For example, Belgium is one of 22 countries with compulsory voting, which basically means it's mandatory for folks 18 and over to vote, or they could potentially face a fine or some type of penalty. The idea is that voting is more than a right. It's a civic obligation. Like, it's your job. Now, let's also talk about registering to vote, another hurdle here in the US. Countries like Sweden and Germany, they automatically register their citizens to vote as soon as they turn 18, something that only 17 states and the District of Columbia offer here in the US.
Is voting too hard in the US?
Voting is way too hard in the United States, especially for young people.
That's Laura Brill, a lawyer who specializes in voting rights. I spoke with her to learn more about how and why the US is so different when it comes to making voting easy.
We do not invite people in a welcoming way to enter our democracy and to participate. And there's hurdles in schools, there's hurdles in our election laws, and it all ends up looking like low youth turnout over the years.
Most states have laws requesting or requiring voters to show some form of identification at the polls. The rest use other methods to verify the identity of their voters. But the list of what's an acceptable ID varies from state to state. I remember when I was doing research for this, in Texas, they accept gun licenses as a form of ID, but not student IDs. So there's a wide variation from state to state. As I said before, we've seen the ridiculously long lines that wrap around buildings and cause people to wait hours and hours. That's usually because of polling closures. Between 2012 and 2018, states and counties with a history of discrimination closed nearly 1,700 polling places. Then we've got something called voter purging. It's when election officials do maintenance and clean up the voter list by deleting the names of ineligible voters because they moved out of state, or they didn't vote in a certain number of elections, or they passed away. But the issue with that is that hundreds of thousands of people, they get their names deleted without any type of notice. And then when they go to show up to the polls to vote, they see that their names are missing, and then they can't cast a ballot. But with all these barriers, there has to be ways for folks to fight it, right? I mean, people want to vote, but there's so many laws and hurdles that get in the way of the process that it can make it less engaging. So how do we push back and fight against it?
I would say first is pre-registration, because having young people be able to organize in high schools for 2 years and to get everybody registered so that when they're 18 they actually can vote, that's a huge benefit. The other one that we haven't talked about yet is online voter registration, which is also a great, many states have it, and again, it's not just blue states that have it. The states are adopting it because it's cheaper and easier to use. And I would say combining that with good civics education, so people, young people understand how they can have a voice and why their voice matters, and how they can organize, because that and the relationship between voting and their lives.
Like, if you could directly talk to young people and make that case about why they shouldn't, give in to that apathy or that frustration about the voting process, what would you say?
We're in a vicious cycle when young people don't vote, because if young people don't turn out, then the politicians say, well, young people don't turn out. Why should I talk to young people about the issues that they care about? And, the issues are issues that all of us should care about.
But now we want to know what you think. Should voting in the US be made easier across the board? Or do you think it's fine as is and we should continue to allow states to make their own rules? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Oh, and before you go, PBS Digital Studios and Above the Noise want to hear from you. We do a survey every year that helps us make more of the stuff that you want to see. You even get to vote on potential new shows. Take a survey in the link in the description below and let them know that Above the Noise is definitely your favorite show. As always, I'm your host, Miles Best. Till next time, y'all. Peace out.
I am not going to make the online people stick around for this reading, because I'm going to give the people in class here just a little bit of time to work on what we just watched. More stuff from the week 2 on the Unit 8 document. I just want to check in with some kids, et cetera, et cetera. So this completes your online attendance requirement for today. Make it a great day or don't. The choice is yours.